Hey, Dr. Greer, stoked to be here.
Good, glad you're here.
So in 2012, there was said to be, a shift in the way we think, and for me, that was the case. Like consciousness, the word consciousness was in my head just constantly, and that led me down the path to finding work. So I was just wondering if you've noticed any increase in this kind of interest in UFOs, or if you think it's just the grand scheme of the universe. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know about 2012 per se, but it has in the last couple years gone up exponentially. All the interest in this. I mean, to the point that you even have Lockheed Martin putting out information that by 2020 something they're going to have a fusion generator that'll run everything. That was in the past month. So things are moving along, and it has been a big move up. What I'm concerned about it's sort of like the Hopi prophecy, where there's one timeline that terminates and there's one that continues on, and we have to choose what timeline we want to be on. It's called the prophecy rock or whatever. It's this etching that the Hopis have. Have you seen it? It's really cool, or disturbing, depending on how you look at it. And I'm reminded also, Colin Andrews is a very, very good friend of mine, the crop circle guy, of a crop circle that appeared some years ago that it was how all the planets would be in the year 2036, but Earth was not in its orbit. Earth was missing. It was sort of like a warning. Now this is 2014. Now that crop circle appeared in late 90s or early 2000s. But, and I don't mean to be apocalyptic in what I'm saying, I'm just saying that as the wonderful Chinese expression goes, unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we're going. Where are we going? Where are we headed here? So, I think that's one of the really important things to realize, and it can happen very, very quickly. It's like in physics, and they talk about this with quantum systems, is that you get to a certain critical mass of coherence, like in superfluidity and helium, and like when 1% of those molecules or atoms of helium are aligned and become coherent, instantly all of them do, and it becomes what's called superfluidity. And so you have this phase transition, it's called, in physics. And so that can happen also with people. And as Rupert Sheldrake pointed out, in the whole concept of morphogenic fields, or it's sort of like the 100th monkey effect, where a certain population learns something, and then when it reaches that critical mass, suddenly monkeys on other islands and in other areas that had no linear contact start automatically know how to do it also. So there's this non-locality of learning in large social systems, and they've proven this with monkeys and primates and also with humans. So all I can say is that if all of us do what we should be doing, we'll hopefully reach that phase transition and move over to this other way of functioning. Does that make sense? Yeah, but it does seem to be increasing, and so Rupert Sheldrake did some really great, he's a biologist at Oxford, I believe, who did some wonderful work on this in terms of morphogenic fields and what's more popularly called the 100th monkey effect. It's a real phenomenon, and so we have to view it in a very that's why I tell people, like people going out, doing meditation together, making contact, putting even the thought or the intent, doesn't matter what you see, just intending to do the correct thing recruits people you'll never know and meet. It has an effect beyond what we can measure and see. And so, it's more important to be in the moment and be in the intent and the process with a pure heart than to be worrying about the outcome. Not that you don't want to worry about the outcome. You want to see a good future. But if you stay in that process, it'll create the good future. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yeah? Good. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you talked a year or two ago about representatives from a G8 country participating in a
CE5.
Yeah. Has there been any development with that?
Yeah, so he's asking about one of the G8 countries who very supportive of the CE5 initiative. And since it's been a couple of years, I'll talk about it very directly. The country is France. And so there was a president a couple years ago named Nicolas Sarkozy. And Sarkozy's people, his intelligence and Air Force people who briefed him on all this stuff were very, very interested in what we were doing. And one of the very old families in France that actually organized the beheading of Marie Antoinette, true, had this old estate in Brittany, and invited us there. So what we did a couple years ago, under the ruse of a training, just a weekend training, is that nobody who came knew this, except a couple of people. Of course, my wife knew. She knows everything. We had this thing, and of course I knew that it was going to be, we used this 2,200 acre estate. And there was an admiral there who's very high up. And also, this admiral had a PhD in physics. And is also, like myself, an MD. Very, very, very wonderful man. And a couple other people. And the host family, who, of course, was a very old French Foreign Legion diplomats, a family of very, very old French. And so we did this just as sort of a training, but also so that the government, the friendly people in the French government could learn the protocols and see. And so they were there. And then I heard back afterwards that they had the whole area, not cordoned off, but there was a security, observational security perimeter around it. And they tracked craft coming over at 200,000 kilometers an hour during the CE5. And it was just a group of novices. Most of them had never been out. And we had some amazing experience, including, if you've seen the photo, we were setting up one evening, and everyone on the side of the part of the circle where I was sitting, we saw this. I was just setting up to do this Sanskrit Vedic puja, and there was this, like a rainbow light that came in just in an instant. And so I had someone take a photograph, and there was this sort of royal purple, mauve-colored, fuzzy disc hovering right above the field. It's in this photograph, stunningly gorgeous. Not quite in this dimension, but not out of it either. But everyone looking in that direction saw this thing flash in. And then we were sitting there one night, and this object came over, and then we had all the cars. There were like 30 cars in this field, because we had like 60 people at this thing. And they all started turning their lights on and off. So this thing went over the vehicles, and it was like, this is like something out of a Close Encounters of the Third Kind movie. And of course, the Admiral's going, holy shit, and and we're in deep meditation, and all of a sudden we hear this, right next to beyond where the cars were, this, it was almost like a metallic thing brushing up again. And there was a craft that was quasi-materialized in the corner of the field. And later I went out, and there were these little beings. There were about 5 of them. And you could hear, now the problem is everyone got up, and it scared the hell out of them. So you heard them scampering off. And so they scampered off and then dematerialized in thin air. Sort of like that one that was in the crop circle a couple years ago, where they saw the feet, and the police saw this tall, luminous white being that was fully materialized, and the police got out and chased it, and the footprint, and it just disappeared into the field in thin air. You know that case? Oh, I was right there when that happened. Yeah, it's near Silbury Hill. Anyway, these expeditions are awesome. You want to come on them, you should come. But the point is that, so they were very, very interested. Now, from there, in terms of bureaucracy, there, like in any government, there are people who are part of this MAGIC or Majesty group. Majestic has different acronyms. Now it's called SIG, Senior Interagency Group, Intelligence Group. Some were friendly, some were not friendly. And when you're talking about a government moving off the dime on this openly, it's very difficult. But again, it's an iterative learning process. And so the way I view it is that, see one, do one, teach one. You demonstrate it, and then hopefully, and I know that they're learning, and probably they're practicing it. Now, the ethical construct and the philosophical underpinning of it is that it has to be done within the context of universal peace. It cannot be done within the context of one national entity vaulting itself over another, et cetera. But I know that this is not going to be able to be done through the UN, because we tried that. Back when Boutros Boutros-Ghali was UN Secretary General, and they were very interested. And his wife came to one of the salons I held in New York, and then the Secretary General after him, Kofi Annan, when we did Disclosure Project, originally they had committed to hold the Disclosure Project event at the Secretariat of the United Nations. But some folks came in with an all-access pass and essentially threatened to pull funding out of the UN on behalf of a certain number of countries, and it would have destroyed the UN. And I was called directly by an ambassador who is attached to the UN Secretary General saying, we wish you well, we support what you're doing, but we cannot do it at the UN. And that's why it was held here at the National Press Club. I have not told that story much. So, you look over the last 10, 15 years, there have been a lot of initiatives from the starts and stops from various governments. And so, yeah, there's a lot of interest, but it's sort of like, that old saying, everyone wants to be first to be second. No, there's a hesitancy to stick your neck out too far on something very controversial, as I mentioned earlier, but also on something that has not just a social opprobrium, but where there's some very powerful people who are not afraid of using their power in retribution against an entity that would do it. And this is why I tell people to me, the clearest path forward for contact, disclosure, and bringing these technologies out are the people, masses of people doing it. Large corporations, the very rich, governments, you don't want to be prejudicial against them, which is why I'm, like last year, I was happy to go to Australia and meet with all these folks. But you have limited expectations. You hope they do the right thing. But what I learned starting back in the Clinton years is that everyone wants to know about this stuff. Very few people want to do anything about it. So knowing about it and doing something about it are two totally separate things. And all we can do, I think each of us can do, is to provide the information, the knowledge, the vision, and let that gather amongst the populace and also with world leaders and other people and see where it goes. And I have a very, not detached, but a very realistic philosophy about that. And many people have said, well, when is disclosure going to happen? I said, well, we did it already. And people think I'm joking. I said, no, when we started this, only about a quarter or a third of the people thought this was real. Now it's 50-some%. Last year, the Marist poll said that 43% of Americans think that we're currently being visited by interstellar extraterrestrial beings. It's a huge number. So I said, in terms of the public, it's kind of there. In terms of officialdom and what I call the hidebound inborn elite, the sort of inbred elite of the world, that's a harder thing to get through. And no smart part because of both power politics, but also more easily. As this one Air Force witness told me, he says, the real way this has been kept secret is just sheer ridicule. The subject, you really don't have to do or say anything. It hides itself because people don't want to be laughed at. People don't want to be put down by their peers. People don't want to be lose esteem amongst their colleagues and what have you. So talk about courage. The biggest courage it takes for someone who's interested in this is to speak the truth in a way that is appropriate. You can't bring everything out to someone who doesn't know anything about it, but that's why we put Disclosure Project, the book, and the videos together so that anyone who's even at the level of the most basic linear understanding will say, boy, where there's smoke, there's fire, because here's a lot of information. from people who with sterling credentials. And, and there is this sort of strange hypocrisy with the mainstream media, and that is, if you had three people who would go on record with the New York Times or Washington Post about a senior person at the White House having sex with someone, it'd be all over. I have 110 people on videotape and testimony with corroborating documents, with their DD-214s, which is their discharge papers from the military, with signed statements, witness oaths that they would testify under oath before Congress with the penalties of perjury, federal penalties of perjury, and it gets ignored by all the mainstream media. You talk about a double standard. So this is, of course, what we're up against, because the big mainstream media, again, not so much, now some of them are tied into, quote, the cabal, if you want to call it that keeps it secret, but most of them, it's like this, I have a family member who will remain nameless, who used to be the city editor of the Boston Globe. And when she found out I was getting involved with this stuff, she says, I don't care if you put a dead extraterrestrial body on my desk, we're not going to run this story. We're a blue chip paper. That belongs in the National Enquirer, and it would never appear in the Boston. I mean, it was just like that. This is a family member. So, and this was not, I assure you, it's not someone on the payroll of the CIA, like Donald Menzel was, or Professor Condon. So I think that we have to understand that it is a real educational process, and putting together the Disclosure Project information with top secret documents and military witnesses and generals and ministers of defense and people who have credentials and respectability, as it were, as pilots or people who are at Strategic Air Command. That's very important, and that body of information is sitting there for anyone to take virtually for free. I mean, we have 60 some of these people's testimony up on the site on YouTube now for free. So that is important that all of us should share that with folks. When you get to governments in these G8, it's very interesting. Before I went over there, I regret that this wasn't actually in the film Sirius. The director took it out, and I don't know why. But I have this beautiful letter, it's in French, from this admiral and the team who wrote about their commitment to make a long-term commitment for this journey with these visitors from other star systems. And amazing. And it's actually from the Ministry of Defense of France on their letterhead, signed. It is the most important government document in the history of the UFO subject, and there it sits in my vault. So, what I say to folks is that that was just a few years ago, that process continues, but it's usually very quiet.
Stephen Bassett right now is doing a big push. He turned over a bunch of documentation to Congress, and he's asking the people to contact their congressman to have a public push for disclosure. How, in your opinion, what is going to be the best method to bring about disclosure, and how close are we to it?
Well, as I mentioned, we've already done disclosure. The majority of people know this stuff is real. I'm talking about the masses. If you do any poll, more people believe this stuff is real than have voted for any president in our lifetime. The question is whether there will be official disclosure. So let's make two distinctions. Disclosure by what we're doing as a grassroots entity versus some authority figure up on Capitol Hill or at the 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue or at the UN doing it. The latter is unlikely. I already sowed that a long time ago. We had tens of thousands of people faxing and writing to their members of Congress after the initial disclosure project, because I was the father of the whole global disclosure movement. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. which moved it off everyone's radar screen. My own sense is that the best way we're going to have more disclosure is to have thousands of people doing and making open contact, where it becomes something you cannot stop. The intelligence community cannot put that genie back in the bottle. And secondly, more people coming forward who are whistleblowers or insiders with documents and evidence. The likelihood that any committee of the Congress or anyone at the White House will do this is, I think, very, very low. I don't care how many people write them. I'm not saying that we shouldn't encourage them. It's their responsibility. But I'm just saying I've already done that over the last 20 years very, very thoroughly. And a lot of people involved with disclosure now actually have never had sit-down meetings with current members of administrations in Congress. I have. And what you hear from them is that, yes, this is wonderful, but let someone else do it. I'll never forget meeting with a senator, Senator Dick Bryan, who was from Nevada, whose home state has Nellis Air Force Base in Area 51, as the public calls it. Pahut Mesa, S4, S9, S12, all the top secret underground facilities. And he and I met at McCarran Airport in what looked like a janitor's closet, and it was just a room, and you're taken there in a cart, and the door opens, and it's this gorgeous conference room for VIPs. This is how things are done, by the way. And things really happen this way, although it'd make a great movie. So we go in there, and I start talking to this guy, and he says, yes, he says, he's Senate Intelligence Committee. He says, but this has never been brought to my attention. And I said, well, yes, that's why I'm meeting with you. I think I need someone like you to head up bringing it to the attention and holding a hearing. And and his chief of staff was there, literally dropped, he was reading the Wall Street Journal, dropped the paper in his lap. And the senator said, I don't think I really can do that, but have you talked to, so in other words, Kissinger called this the hottest potato in the cosmos, so this issue. And so basically, I want to pass it to someone else. So he gave me the name of someone else. So the passing of the buck on this is legendary. And I've met face to face with people who are on these committees and at the Pentagon, and asking them to do something about it, which would entail enormous risk on their part. I mean, as one congressman said, yeah, I'd be known as Congressman Moonbeam. Or, in other words, the press would have a field day. And I think that that's one of the real problems. And therefore, should we exhort these leaders to do the right thing? Yes, of course, and we continue to. Do I think that that's a likely way it'll happen? No. The most likely way is more and more people from the inside with evidence and corroboration coming forward, and thousands of CE5 contact teams reaching a critical mass where then an undeniable event happens that can no longer be contained, that goes viral. Now, I don't think that I don't want anyone to take away from this that I don't support trying to hold our leaders' feet to the fire. And that's why I put this briefing together for the president. That's why I went to Australia and met with 120 leaders from around the world and Minister of Defense of Australia and everything else. I still think that there's a responsibility, if you believe in representative government, to ask your representatives to do the right thing. But I'm just saying, from a realistic point of view, the likelihood of change happening from those quarters. And it's a little bit like after I, did all this with the Clinton administration, and the Rockefeller family was running interference with us and hosted Bill and Hillary Clinton at the JY Ranch, where I'd gone out there and had all the meeting with all these spooks and top secret people, and then, there was a man who worked very closely with the Clintons who then came to our house. This is when I was still working full time as an emergency doctor in North Carolina, and he came down and had dinner with us at the table, and he said, well, this was like a month or two after my wife and I had come up here to meet with the CIA director and his wife. And he said, the president and the people around him are very supportive of what you're recommending. I said, oh, good. And, you know, we're having dinner around the table in this house, a big Tudor house, and the 4 kids, or little kids back then, around the table. And he says, but they really don't think the president can do anything about this because they're concerned he'll end up like Jack Kennedy. And I started laughing because I thought he's sort of a big, fat, you know, operative for the Democratic Party who was sort of a jokester and very funny guy. I thought he was just making sort of, you know, a facetious, and he stopped me. He said, no, we're not kidding. And I said, well, Kevin, don't talk about this in front of the kids. Let's talk about this later. So we went to the library later and talked about it. He says, no, absolutely. They think that this could actually happen, that it would be too dangerous for the president. And I said, well, what do you want me to do about it? I'm just a country doctor here in North Carolina rattling around in an ER. And they said, well, they think you should do it. And my eyes roll back in my head. Are you kidding me with this? Now, you can imagine, I'm in my 30s. And so this is 1994. So, you know, 20 years ago, I was in my late 30s. And so I thought, well, then I said, well, here's the real reason, is that it is risky, but you view the president as an expendable, but I am. He says, that's right, you're expendable. Very cynical, very Washington. Yeah, throw you under the bus, who cares? You know. So since then, I sort of accepted, well, I'm the throwaway guy. You know, my career, my life, none of that matters. Because, you know, in this city, you know, it's everyone's ambition. And, you know, at the Rockefeller Ranch, I know for a fact that when they were going through the briefing materials that we'd put together, which we've made available to the public, the disclosure book has most of that in it. But that basically, at that point, Hillary stood up and said, this is too dangerous and we really can't deal with this. So, and so what you find is that they are interested. Now, you know, years later, very, very close friends of the Clintons, who used to live in the private quarters of the White House, I was meeting at her home, and and she told me this hilarious story, that even though all the people around Bill Clinton, including his wife, did not want him to deal with this issue because of the risks involved, he kept the briefing document on the back of his toilet in the private quarters, but one day he brought it out and was sitting with this friend of the Clintons that I knew very well, and had it open. He was going through the document going, well, I know all this is true, but they won't tell me a thing, not a goddamn thing. Just like that. And when she told me this story, I just cracked up. I went, oh my God, I mean, you know. But, you know, hey, everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time. And no one walks on water. I think it's, you know, it's understandable. And, but to answer your question, we continue to do what you're talking about, but at authentic levels. I don't want to say anything disparaging about anyone, but at authentic levels, because we have, you know, the access to this sort of folks. But where I think the action is grassroots. I think it's the action with disclosures with the people, more people coming forward who are whistleblowers. I think it's with CE5 teams reaching a critical mass, a morphogenic field around the planet that then brings this to the next level. And with the energy, the same thing. The technology is the same thing. And in a way, perhaps that's how it should be. If you look at human history, no big, really quantum leap or big leap forward in human history has ever come out of the centers of power. Ever. It's always come from something in left field, something unexpected, bottom up. It's never come from the centers of power, because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the people who are in those systems, by definition, are trapped in the mechanism of their devices, you see. And so, in a sense, we're more liberated. I'll never forget in 1992, the former head of Army Intelligence pulled me aside at a meeting, and after we were in Florida, and we were doing the CE5 work, and there were 40 people on the beach, and that's when you've seen the video. The guy goes, holy damn hot shit, and there were 4 of these Okay, you've all seen that. It was a very bad camera, and we didn't have night scopes back then, but they were really quite close. You can't tell it from the camera. And that made its way over to the CIA and to this guy who had been the head of Army intelligence, who was doing covert stuff as a private contractor. And he was a general. And one of their best friends, and there was an NSA guy there also, National Security Agency guy, and they were really concerned about what we were doing, very unhappy, because he basically said, you have no business doing this. I said, well, I'm going to do it anyway. That's how I am, you know. I'm nice until I'm not nice, and I'm probably going to run you over. But anyway, and I just said, look, you know, I'm not doing this as a civilian, and I haven't signed a security oath to anyone but my conscience and God and the humanity. So buzz off, none of your business. But what was interesting, one of their friends who was at this conference pulled me aside later, and I want you to think about this and take it into your own soul, and said, you know, they act like they're angry at you, but they're actually really jealous. And I said, what do you mean jealous? And is the head of Army intelligence, this is NSA? They said, yes, but she said, this was a countess from a member of royal family. And she said, you're free to do anything you want. And you can do these wonderful things. They are not free. They are in a system where they know that they are on a leash, and they are controlled, and they are in a black box. And they really are jealous of you. So don't give this kind of power more than you should to these entities. You guys, all of us, have such freedom because we're not part of that corrupt system. That's the power we have, because we're not part of a corrupt system, either economically or politically or institutionally, that restrains what we want to do, which is make contact, disclose the information, bring out these technologies. So we have this freedom to operate that people who are in the system at the Pentagon and the agency and the White House and Congress really find they don't have. So it's a beautiful thought that, you know, thank God I've been offered to be pulled into that system and turned it down. Because I will not sign a security oath, by the way. All these meetings I've had, CIA director, head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, members of the Senate, head of intelligence, joint staff, J2, they've all been without me signing anything regarding secrecy. And if someone says, we want you to, I will not go. I said, no, I'm head of the disclosure project.